Welcome to the Obesity Project, episode 3, where today we're talking about nurture versus nature, the obesity debate. And for many, many years, it has been tossed around whether obesity is genetic or whether it's acquired through the environment. And many, many people throw around the topic of calories in versus calories out. And, as I've kind of made reference to in yesterday's video, that this is a flawed theory that if you decrease the calories in, you're going to decrease the calories out. And one of the things we'll talk about in future video, but I just want to touch on here, is that people look at the calories in, calories out as independent variables where one has nothing to do with the other. So if you decrease the calories in, the calories out does not change. And that's not really true. That basically what happens is when the calories in goes down, your body says, oh, I don't have enough fuel to burn. So it decreases the output of the body. And so you actually wind up burning less calories. And so when we look at obesity as a genetic versus an environmental factor, you've got to think, well, okay, if it's a calories in, calories out idea, then that should be mostly based on the environment and really have very little to do with genetics. But the reality is there's a highly significant genetic component to obesity. And so there were a couple studies that were done that I think are worth sharing. The first one was an adoption study. It was actually based out of Denmark because they keep really, really good records in Denmark after children or babies are adopted out to their adoptive parents. And so the theory behind it being acquired by the environment, so like, let's say, a child is adopted by a family. The theory is if that family is obese, they're going to put that child in a situation where they're eating the same way that the obese family eats. And so those children should be obese. And when you looked at the records and you look at the study, it actually demonstrates that there's no link between the kids who are adopted and their adoptive parents in terms of the level of obesity. There's no cause and effect. There's no relationship. So you can have heavy parents and have a normal weight child, and vice versa. You can have a very heavy set child in with very lean, very thin parents, adoptive parents. Now, conversely, when we look at the parents, the bio parents of those children, there's a direct link. It's super high predictive capability that demonstrates that those children, even in a different environment, still are heavy if the parents are heavy. And so you may be saying to yourself, well, that doesn't really make sense. But that's the reality. When you look at the study and you look at the genetic predisposition, it seems to be a genetic thing. It seems to be run in families. There was another study that was absolutely really fascinating, where they took identical twins that were separated at birth and were raised separately. So they have the exact same genetic makeup. And yet when they were put into these situations outside of being connected together, there was almost a 70% correlation of if one child was obese, the other child was obese. If the one child was thin, the other child was thin. And so, given the same genetic makeup in different environments where the eating habits may have been very, very different, then this shows the genetic link attached to obesity. Obesity epidemic, which actually began right around 1977, as I mentioned yesterday, with the advent of the government coming out and creating the food pyramid and changing people over from a low carb diet to a very high carb diet. We saw obesity take off and really be on the rise. And so when you look at that, like everything had been level for a long, long period of time. And then in 77, it kind of took off. And you saw this big, big jump in obesity. And yet you have to say to yourself, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. You just finished saying how there's such a huge genetic component to obesity. Yet when you think about it, it's not like suddenly there was these, incredible genetic mutations which caused all these people to be obese. It didn't happen in one generation, but we can show evidence that obesity has absolutely carried forward and become a significant issue. Also, when we look at obesity in the wild, there's virtually no evidence of obesity in the wild. You don't see animals in the wild getting very, very heavy or very fat. And there are situations where animals prepare for hibernation, like a bear puts on a lot of weight, but that's weight to get them through a long fast, a long starvation period where they're not going to be eating and gaining calories. But when you look in the wild, you don't see obese animals. And think about it from a perspective of a predator. So if a predator is looking at a prey, the one that they're going to look at the most is the one who is the heaviest, because not only is that animal likely to be slower and have less energy, but they're also going to so there's no real advantage to an animal putting on extra weight to be eaten by a predator. So they're going to be slower and they're going to be much more likely to be eaten. Also, when you look at in the wild, if animals didn't have a way to store energy through fat, then they would die very quickly with any energy expenditure. So there has to be some fat on the animal's body, but it can't be too much because then it sets them up for being eaten. So there's really rare instances of any animals being seen in the wild being obese. And when we look at times of plentiful food availability in the wild, what winds up happening is you don't see bigger, larger animals. You don't see animals getting fatter. You see the numbers of those animals, the population grows. So the population, the numbers of animals grow, but it's not like the animals themselves are getting bigger and getting fatter. The numbers grow instead of the size of the person. So we have to look at it and say, well, why are humans all of a sudden in such a short period of time getting increasingly obese? It's not like genetic mutation happened overnight. And it's not that, we just got so much fatter because we're just eating more. That's not the case, because as we showed, that when we eat more, the metabolism goes up. If we eat less, the metabolism slows. So obesity has to be controlled by something else, not just genetics, not just calories. It has to be controlled by something else. And that's really what we're going to focus mostly on in the next video. But I'm going to set the stage by telling you that obesity is a problem of hormone imbalance, that all of the systems in our body are controlled by hormones, and obesity and the amount of fat on our bodies, whether lean or obese, the amount of fat on our bodies is tightly regulated by hormones. And that's what we're going to dive into in tomorrow's video. So I hope you learned a little something about genetics and about obesity and how it's not just nature, it's not just nurture, it's not just the environment you're putting in that's leading you to eat more. There is a genetic component, but that genetic component doesn't explain why there's this huge uptick in 1977. There was something else that happened in 1977 that caused obesity to go on the rise, and that's the change in our diet. And I'm going to talk tomorrow about how the change in our diet affects the hormones and why the obesity crisis really began when we changed our diet as a whole, as a group, as a group of Americans, and really Western civilization and the entire globe changing the way they eat. So thank you so much for watching. As always, like, share, and comment. If you gain some value out of this, please share it with other folks. We need to educate people. We need to get people understanding that obesity is reversible, chronic illness is reversible, and it's all based around dietary constraints and dietary choices that we make. So thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you in tomorrow's video.